How were a relatively small, in fact, in some respects, tiny force of Westerners arriving in the Americas able to subdue large empires that dominated the continent, and really both continents, we're talking now both about North and South America? The writer Mario Vargas Llosa wrote an essay many years ago in which he attempted to answer this question. And he said basically that the Indians lived in a kind of enchanted universe, a universe governed, as they believed, by spirits. When the Europeans came, they confused the Europeans with gods. When things were not going their way, when they encountered things they didn't know, they didn't understand, they couldn't respond to, they responded by sort of sacrificing their own soldiers to their totems. They were like, listen, our gods are failing us. We need to kill more of our own people and sacrifice them to the totems. Montezuma, for example, when his military advisors told him, listen, you're going to lose this battle to the Spanish, he ordered all the people who told him that to be imprisoned, and he killed their wives and children. So this was the habitual response to a real threat that the Indians could have prevailed had they understood it and known how to respond to it. But the Indians were kind of used to exterminating their own inferiors, people in their own society. They were like, oh yeah, you're an ant, I'm going to step on you. But in dealing with the Spanish, for the first time, some of these guys like Moctezuma were dealing with a rival force that they had to contend with, and they simply didn't know how to do that. Now, nevertheless, when we look back at these conquests, the conquests of Cortez, the conquests of others, we hear it very often said that the white man stole the land of the Indians. And this is, again, kind of presented as if it's like obvious, it's gospel. And of course, it seems to be obvious because, of course, the Indians were in possession of the land. They had it, and then they didn't have it. And so who took it from them, if not the white man? So the charge of theft here appears to be, in a sense, irrefutable. But I want to take what seems obvious and make it a little bit problematic, because I want to make it problematic by looking at something that actually Frederick Douglass once said when he was talking about being a young slave in Maryland. And he said that he would take food from his master. He would actually take pork from a barrel and he'd eat it. And he goes, yeah, you can't really accuse me of stealing, he says, because he goes, I myself was owned by my master. So, by the way, was the pig that I ate. So all I'm doing is transferring the pig from one bucket, which the master owns, to another bucket that the master owns, namely me. And I always chuckle when I think about this, because I think what Douglass is really saying is that the modern concept of theft implies an underlying notion of ownership, of property rights, of morality. Theft requires that someone legitimately owns something so that it's possible for someone else to illegitimately take it. If I steal your corn, and it turns out it wasn't your corn, you stole it from someone else, then I have in fact committed theft, but not against you. It wasn't your corn. I've committed theft against the guy that you stole it from, the guy who supposedly owns the corn in the first place. So this is the key point. Did the Indians prior to Columbus have any concept of property rights? No. Or to put it differently, yes, the concept of property rights was takers, keepers. In other words, the guy who occupies the land owns the land. And so you had sedentary Indian tribes and nomadic tribes. The sedentary tribes would cultivate the land. The nomadic tribes would get tomahawks and axes and spears. And then they would raid the sedentary tribes. They would displace them. And then they would become the new sedentary tribes until they were in turn raided. So the point is, you couldn't go to one Indian tribe and say, it's not your land. They'd be like, yeah, it's my land. I took it from that guy. So it now belongs to me. I'm the owner because I'm in possession. Possession confers title. So let's remember that by this standard, let's call it the Native American standard, the land belongs to the white man because the white man took it by exactly the same rules that the Native American tribes applied to each other. Now, if you somehow get away from all this and you simply make the broader point and say, listen, the Indians, however you want to look at it, they were here first, and it's therefore their land. The original occupant of the land, and of course the Indians themselves came as immigrants. They came probably across, originally the Native Americans came from Asia. There's some arguments about how they got here. They come over the Bering Strait. But nevertheless, the point is they were here first. That's indisputable. But the question I'm asking is, does being first give you title to two entire continents? Now, to test this idea, I'm going to look at the example from the Bible of Cain and Abel. So Abel was a shepherd. He was a nomad. He went from place to place with his flocks. Cain was a farmer. Cain tilled the land. Now, let's just say that Cain didn't kill Abel, and they both continued, but every time Cain had descendants, his descendants would cultivate land, and Abel was a nomad, and his descendants are nomads. They're shepherds with flocks. And so at the end of the day, what happens is that Cain's descendants occupy all the land, all the available land. And then they go, we own it. And not only do we own it in perpetuity. Why? Because we tilled it, we were here first. And you were wandering around. And so you don't have any claim, and we have a claim. So does this mean that Cain owns the whole world because he was the first to cultivate land and Abel was basically just walking around? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't follow. The original Bedouin who shows up at an oasis doesn't own the oasis. They don't have a right to decide who gets to drink water. Everyone has to pay them a toll. Nonsense. When there's unoccupied land and other land that can be... Let's remember that the white man didn't come to the Americas. Well, some did, to get rich and go home. But the majority, and this was true of just as much of the Spaniards who came and settled in South America as it's true of the English who came to North America, to what we now call America, they came as settlers. They came to live. They came to relocate. They came to make their lives and their descendants' lives here. And to follow a theory that was advanced by John Locke, they came to own land by mixing their labor with it. They made the land, so to speak, productive, and their basis of claiming title was that. It's that we took land, the land by itself is not worth much. Locke argues that land alone is kind of worthless. He calls it moss and leaves. And he says, but what makes land valuable? Well, what makes land valuable is that when human beings use not just their physical labor, but their ingenuity to get something out of land that is not obviously even present in it, to create, in other words, a civilization, a society, a community. And by doing that, says Locke, by mixing, in Locke's terms, our labor with land, we come to own that land, that particular piece of land. And so the point I want to make here is not to settle the issue of property rights, but to argue that the sort of glib idea that the white man stole the land, well, that's kind of that's not. I want to play a short clip from my movie America, in which I posed a question to Charmaine Whiteface, the one of the leaders of the Sioux tribe. Listen.
What are the words that come to mind when you hear the phrase Christopher Columbus?
A lost sailor.
Who was looking for my country, not yours.
Yes.
Yeah, but you wish he didn't come.
I wish he didn't come.
She wishes he never came. So I want now to ask that question. What if Columbus never came? Or you can ask the question in a more radical form that I did in that movie. What if America didn't even exist? What if there was no physical landmass called America? Would the world be better today? No, I don't think so. Now, what would happen to the Native Americans in this country if Columbus never came? Now, one argument is, well, all the stuff that the white man brought, from penicillin, modern medicine, the technology to build buildings, the space program, the Native Americans would obviously have developed all that. Well, I don't think so. I don't think they would have developed it any more than the Asian Indians would have on their own brought the things that the British brought to India. Now, the British didn't bring them out of goodwill. They brought them out of the desire to rule and dominate India, but they brought them nevertheless. And so, interestingly, when the British left, the Indians didn't get rid of all those things. They could have. They could have said, listen, let's pull down all these buildings, these Victorian structures, Churchgate Station right in the middle of Bombay. Let's get rid of it. British brought all these, hot suits, not really well suited to the climate. We don't need to wear ties. Let's get rid of all this stuff. Let's get rid of courts and democracy and elections and separation of powers and human rights. We don't need any of it. But the Indians decided, no, let's actually keep, I would say, most of it. Yeah, sure, we're going to take Bombay and start calling it Mumbai. We're going to take Bangalore and call it Bengaluru. But even notice that even there, the names are so similar to the original name, so nobody gets confused. So here's the point. The point is this, that the Native Americans, as Mario Vargas Llosa said, lived in the enchanted world. The whole method of using reason to solve problems, the scientific method, the method of discovery, all of this was alien to the Native American tribes and alien to many other people around the world. So the question is this really a practical vision today? Because people say, well, the world before Columbus was such a paradise. And my point is, if it was such a paradise, why don't you recreate it? You can have it now. I mean, there are Indian reservations all over the country. You could actually decide, well, listen, you know what? Let's go back to living out of the pages of National Geographic. I mean, who needs cars? Who needs electricity? Who needs modern medicine? Who needs casinos? Who needs cheeseburgers? Let's just get on a horse and go look for food. By the way, this little riff here about the horse, even that doesn't really work. You know why? The American Indians had no horses. There were no horses in the Americas. The Spanish brought the horse to the Americas. So even the horse, the famous Indian movies, all these Indians are riding horses. Yeah, they got that from the West also. So the point I'm trying to make is that you can't bring the old world back. It's almost like saying, I want to live like a frog. You can't live like a frog. We're human beings. You can't live as if we're not in the 21st century. And the truth of the matter is, if Columbus didn't discover America, who would have probably? The Chinese. They discover America. So which is better, to have been ruled by the West, Western civilization, which along with oppression, remember there was a conquest ethic even in the West as there was worldwide, but the West also brought an ethic of freedom, an ethic of liberation, an ethic of human rights. And if the Chinese did it, if the Chinese came to the Americas, we wouldn't have that. As we see in countries ruled by China. Look what's happening to Hong Kong today. Look what they would like to do to Taiwan. So, you know what? I like National Geographic. It's kind of fun for me to thumb through the pages. But I don't want to live in the pages of National Geographic. And you know what? Neither does anyone else. All these leftists, Columbus was horrible. They don't realize not just their lifestyle, not just their cheeseburgers and their cell phones, but their very existence. Think of all the Latino people here who are mestizo people. The entire population of Mexico is a mestizo culture created by a mixture of the Spanish and the Indians. No Columbus, you know what? You wouldn't exist. So let's have a little bit of realism in this case against Columbus. He was in many respects a man of his time, but he was also a great man, a man of indomitable will. He could easily have taken a country estate and said, listen, I got to America, that's it, I'm done, I'm going to be a lord, call me Lord Columbus. No, he did a second voyage, and a third, and a fourth. Why? Because at heart, he loved the idea of adventure, of discovery, with all its hardships, the open sea. He was a man cut from a completely different cloth, of far superior qualities, you might say, than many of the miserable critics who deplore him now.